Welcome back to the Tundra, episode 23, presented by Nicolet Law. He's Packers legend John Kuhn. I'm Matt Schneidman of The Athletic. It's the offseason. The offseason grind is here. It's Super Bowl week. But as we've come to expect covering the Green Bay Packers, there is no shortage of news. A couple new things to discuss this week. We'll get into it all. But first, John, and we knew this was coming because of some reports out there and what I was told as well, that the extension for Brian Gutekunst was expected to happen. It has now officially happened. The Packers announced a couple days ago that Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst, and President of Football Operations and Executive Vice President, or I should say Director of Football Operations and Executive Vice President Russ Ball, have all signed multi-year contract extensions. What I want to do here in the first segment is evaluate Brian Gutekunst. And I know that's impossible to do just in a 10, 15-minute segment here, but I've written down some of the pros and some of the cons for Brian Gutekunst. Some things he's done really well, some things he has lacked in. And I want to quickly read Ed Policy's statement first when announcing this extension for Brian Gutekunst and obviously Matt LaFleur and Ed Policy before we get into this. So what Ed said was this: "We are excited to extend our commitment to Brian, Matt, and Russ as the leaders of our football operations. Their steadfast dedication, passion, and collaboration have remained constant in our drive to compete at the highest level. While we are all disappointed with the way this season ended, we remain aligned in purpose and have spent considerable time over the past weeks collaborating on a path forward. I am exceedingly confident we have the right people to achieve our goal. The entire Packers organization looks forward to supporting every effort to bring our community and fans another championship that they very much deserve." So, was it the right decision? We've already talked about the Matt LaFleur extension. Was it also the right decision to extend Brian Gutekunst?
Yeah, I would say so. And I know you've got a list of pros and cons or things that you can grade Brian Gutekunst on. But I'll be honest with you. To me, I look at it one way. Is this roster constructed in a way that can compete for a Super Bowl? And this year, we definitely believed that was the case for the majority of the season. The injuries took a big toll on this roster, and not just in numbers, not just in quantities, but the quality of players that it knocked down. And I think that with another year to be able to pick away some spots and to try and get more efficient in some areas, i.e. the offensive line, i.e. the defensive backfield, i.e. the defensive line on the interior, this roster can again be one of the rosters that is favored at the beginning of the season to go all the way to the Super Bowl. So that's how I judge a general manager. Does he bring the players in that correlate to being able to make a deep playoff or a Super Bowl run? I think they've done that here in Green Bay.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Has he provided the coaching staff and the organization with the necessary players? And I would agree, because as we've discussed with LaFleur, the roster itself, as it was constructed, or as it is constructed without injuries, because you obviously can't plan for that, is one worthwhile of a legitimate Super Bowl contender, I think. And that is ultimately what you grade Brian Gutekunst on. But because this is a podcast and we're about generating discussion, let's go through some pros and cons. Why don't you say that, John? Pros. Number one, the Jordan Love pick. Brian Gutekunst, and what I want to do is just briefly dive into each of these. We don't need to spend a lot of time on each of these bullet points. In my mind, the Jordan Love pick was one of the boldest draft picks in recent NFL history. You trade up to get a guy in the first round with, I think it was 4 years remaining on the contract of arguably the best player in franchise history. You're essentially putting your job on the line in doing so. Maybe that wasn't reality, but that's what it looks like from the outside. And I don't know if we'd say he'd hit a home run on it, because maybe some people think a home run would be winning a Super Bowl with Jordan Love. But I think Brian Gutekunst nailed one of the boldest draft picks in recent NFL history. So that's a check in the pros department.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. It's the most important position in the NFL. It's the most important position in all of professional sports. And the Green Bay Packers have successfully got their guy the third time in a row. As you watch around the league and see teams struggle to get that starting quarterback, that franchise quarterback for the foreseeable future, which at the NFL now, that's looking at 10, 15 years of having a quarterback on your team. We just watched the general manager in Minnesota getting fired because he picked the wrong guy. Well, Brian Gutekunst didn't do that. He picked the right guy to succeed for Aaron Rodgers.
All right, number 2, the Micah Parsons trade. I mean, I don't think it's a stroke of genius to identify Micah Parsons as a talent, but the ability to actually execute that trade for him and convince Jerry Jones that it's the right idea, I think that's another check in the pros department, because right now, Micah Parsons trade looks like a resounding win. I know he tore his ACL, obviously out of Brian Gutekunst's control, but assuming Micah Parsons comes back to full health sometime in September, I think he can be a cornerstone for a Super Bowl contender. And what we saw from Micah Parsons in 15 games or whatever it was, 14 games during his first season with the Packers, I think Brian Gutekunst deserves a lot of credit, not for saying, oh, Micah Parsons is a good football player, but making that trade happen and pulling the trigger on it.
And I think if you take it a step farther and you start talking about winning Super Bowls, the quarterback's very important. However, that defense is equally as important. Check out the defenses that are in the Super Bowl this year. Check out the defenses that Tom Brady had when he was going to Super Bowls and winning them. Check out the defenses that Patrick Mahomes had when he was going to Super Bowls and winning them. And it takes that cornerstone piece. For Brett Favre, it was Reggie White. For Aaron Rodgers, it was Charles Woodson, Clay Matthews. For Jordan Love, it's Micah Parsons. And that's what they have now. They paired the defense with the offensive star. Now they need to get some correlator pieces around that.
Another thing, I think Brian Gutekunst has done a good job stocking the roster with talent on days 2 and 3. We'll get into his success rate per se in the first round, which I know a lot of people have some qualms over, but days 2 and 3, he's found guys like Zach Tom, Tucker Kraft, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Elton Jenkins, Rasheed Walker, Evan Williams, Edgerrin Cooper. I didn't go through every GM in the league and compare that day 1 versus day 2 versus day 3 success rate to all the other GMs in the league, but that's a bevy of talent from rounds that you're not exactly expected to find that caliber in, John.
Yeah, and I think I know where you're going to go on some of the cons here, but when you talk about the draft as a whole, are you drafting players that are turning into starters on your football team? Are you drafting players that can be developed? Because that's what the marriage of a football team is. The general manager, he drafts the players, he brings them in, they're the talent. The coaches, they then develop the talent and give them the tutelage to be able to take that to the field and be the best version of themselves along with motivating. And then it's a player-driven league. The players drive how successful this football team is. And if you have a marriage of all 3 of those, believing in the same ideas, having the same kind of vision, that's when you have a successful football team.
I ultimately think, like you kind of alluded to, at the end of the day, it's, do you supply the roster with enough talent? And yes, people can say, oh, well, if there wasn't a number 7 seed added to the playoffs, the Packers wouldn't have made the playoffs in the last 3 years. But they did. And I know we don't still use the excuse, justification, whatever you want to call it, of their youth. But as the youngest team in the NFL by average age, the last 3 seasons, the Packers made the playoffs in each of those years. So I think it's a testament to Gutekunst for not only identifying and drafting young talent that has gotten the Packers far, but also supplementing that with veterans like Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs and Micah Parsons to help take this team to the playoffs. And obviously the next step is something that they're still striving for. And that is where his performance maybe has left something to be desired in terms of guys like Aaron Banks, Nate Hobbs, the cornerback position. And that leads us into some of the cons, because this roster is still imperfect. The Packers, when healthy, can have one of the best teams in the NFL. But a GM's job is also to build a team with adequate depth in case some injuries do happen. So I'm going to name just a couple things. Tight end depth. The Luke Musgrave pick hasn't panned out. Cornerback room. I was a little perplexed at the time, and I'm interested to get your thoughts, John, on rolling into the 2025 season with Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, and Nate Hobbs as your top 3. And obviously Hobbs has not worked out in the slightest. And then some of the decisions on the offensive line that Brian Gutekunst was a part of, because this offensive line was not good enough. The decision to move Elton Jenkins to center didn't exactly work out. The decision to sign Aaron Banks has not worked out. So what are your thoughts on maybe some of the shortcomings that he's had, specifically some of the ones I just threw out there.
Yeah, well, no roster is perfect, and no GM bets 1,000. That's clear as day. You can go up and down any roster in the National Football League, and you will see that. What I liked about what Goody did is, and what he does do, is he notices those deficiencies and he goes out and makes moves when he can in the offseason, and sometimes even during the season, to be able to go out and get players to come in and fit the bill. He tried to fit the bill when Devontae Wyatt went down this year, bringing in Jordan Riley. He got hurt as well. So he's not afraid to admit when a position is missing the mark. This year, I think they tried something at the offensive line. They had belief that it could work, and I had belief that it could work. I thought our offensive line this year coming into it was about as deep as it was ever going to be. But some guys did not play up to their standard during the season, and I think the Packers kind of evolved during the season and figured out ways to grow with some of their younger talent. When they moved Anthony Belton inside, I felt like the offensive line got better. Sean Ryan beside Anthony Belton for a number of games seemed to have gotten stronger on the inside. A lot of this in the immediate future is going to hinge on Jordan Morgan's ability to go out and play left tackle next year. That's what it's going to boil down to. And then in the secondary and the middle of the defensive line, Brian Gutekunst is going to have some work to be done, but that's every year. Every year you have that instance, and every year, every team has some spots that are definitely their strong suits and definitely their weak spots. But overall, the body of work of Brian Gutekunst, I think, has been a great job.
I tend to agree. And speaking of Jordan Morgan, as we wrap up this segment here, I think a big talking point has been Brian Gutekunst's success rate in the first round. He's had guys like Jair Alexander and Jordan Love that are obvious hits. There's guys like Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt who are, I would say, hits, even though they haven't signed Quay Walker to a second contract yet. But then there's guys like Darnell Savage and Eric Stokes, who I would say are misses. And then you have guys like Lucas Van Ness and Jordan Morgan. I would say the jury is still out on both of those guys. And Matthew Golden, obviously the talent is there, but we'll see if he pans out as well. So people like to say, and Rashawn Gary, also a first rounder, by the way, I would say that was a hit, but the decision to give him a second contract, in hindsight, probably not a good call. But at the time, it seemed like the sound decision to make. So I would say there's a mixed bag of success in the first round for Brian Gutekunst. Now, again, I'd need to go deep into the archives and other teams' history to really see how it stacks up to the rest of the league and the rest of the GMs. But I'm not going to dismiss people who say he hasn't been good enough in the first round. But at the same time, I think if Van Ness can stay healthy and become that number 2 pass rusher behind Parsons, if they indeed release Gary, and if Jordan Morgan can become a sound left tackle, I think that'll change the narrative on his success rate in the first round.
And the narrative is a funny thing, right? I mean, he's drafting traditionally at the end of the first round. He's got a few that have been up towards the middle of the first round, but a lot of times Brian Gutekunst, his first round picks, you want to compare these first round picks to Myles Garrett's and Micah Parsons of the world. Well, he just doesn't ever draft in the top 5 or even the top 10. Right. Rashawn Gary's the highest, I believe, at number 12. And Rashawn did take over for Zadarius Smith and did, earn that starting position and did look like he was ascending in a trajectory that was going to put him at a spot where you were going to feel very good about him as a cornerstone of the defensive line. And when Micah Parsons came in, he did have 7.5 sacks through the first 8 games of the season this year before going on his drought. So the performance sometimes looks fantastic out of these first round picks, and sometimes it doesn't. It clearly didn't work out with Darnell Savage. It clearly didn't work out with Eric Stokes, but they were still guys that played a significant amount of time with Green Bay. And when we said it didn't work out, it merely worked out where they didn't get their second contract. Again, everybody around the league, all the GMs, they have mistakes. They all have picks they wish they evaluated differently. But the overall building of this roster, and you mentioned it, Matt, you can make up for some of those first round misses by hitting later on in the draft. And I feel like Goody's done that as good as any general manager in the league.
I would agree. I think guys like Tom and Kraft and Dobbs on.
You didn't say Rasheed Walker, the guy who took over.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Check the tape. I said Rasheed Walker, 7th round.
Okay,
Well, not just I said it before.
I think Rasheed Walker is one that is very underrated as a pick, as a 7th round draft pick, to be able to come in and take over for David Bakhtiari and do what he did when Jordan Love was basically taking his first starts. And Rasheed Walker was able to go in there and really steady that left side, anchor that left side for the Packers. And he's going to get a big second contract by another team. So Rasheed Walker has to be seen as one of the best hits that Goody has ever had.
Yeah, considering where he drafted him. So hopefully that gives you all a fair big picture look at the job Brian Gutekunst has done. 8 years as general manager already. Time flies when you're the 7th seed, I guess. I say that kind of jokingly. Bottom line is, I think we both agree that it was the right decision to extend him. I think what we've learned about Ed Policy is that it's important for him to have that synergy in the front office between his top 3 lieutenants, if you will, LaFleur, Gutekunst, and Russ Ball. And I wouldn't be surprised if all 3 of those guys are kind of on the same timeline of contract length, whatever that may be, since those details have obviously not been released publicly. All right. Next segment, we're going to get into some listener/viewer questions. A dangerous venture that we take on here, John, because there are some that are a little bit reckless, including some pointed toward you. So we're going to get into that and much more here after the break. You're listening to The Tundra.
Hey guys, John Kuhn here, and this episode of the Tundra podcast is sponsored by Nicolet Law. In football, we get instant replays with crystal clear visuals and slow motion breakdowns from every single angle. Unfortunately, after an accident, you don't get any of that. Most people wish they could show the insurance companies an instant replay though. That's where Nicolet Law comes in. Their attorneys dig into every single detail and track down all the evidence that they can, building the closest thing in real life to an instant replay. When life hits you harder than a defensive lineman, you deserve a team that's ready to hit back. Nicolet Law helps injured Wisconsinites get back into the game. Call 1-855-NICOLET or go to nicoletlaw.com.
Welcome back to the Tundra, episode 23, presented by Nicolet Law. Okay, John, it's always a dangerous proposition to ask our loyal viewers and listeners for questions because you never know how reckless they're going to get. We have a handful to get to today. So what do you say we get started?
I'm not afraid of reckless. I'm ready to go.
Okay. Number 1. I'm going to read this one. Some of these people's names are like troll names. They're burner accounts. People don't put their face on it. I think in order to ask a question on this show, you have to have your actual face on your account. We'll implement that.
We'll never get any, Matt. We'll never get any good ones. We'll never get any smoke. So let's just let them fly.
All right. Henry Hankovich at Huffy Henry 414. I don't know if that is a real name or whatever. Are Goody and the coaching staff aware of the public's disdain for Rich Bisaccia? Here's my answer to that. I think fans need to realize, and I mean this with all due respect, I think fans need to realize that people inside the building, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, John, don't really care what fans think. They're not going to let fan opinion dictate their decisions. I am of the belief that Rich Bisaccia has never been on the hot seat. As I've mentioned, I think Tom Silverstein reported last year that Bisaccia's extension was for this past season and this next one. So by that, he's still under contract. And if you're looking at it objectively, I don't think there's a legitimate reason to fire him. So when everyone's asking, ask if Rich Bisaccia is back, or is Rich Bisaccia back, or do they see how much the public hates Rich Bisaccia? A, I don't think they care. And B, I think the whole Rich Bisaccia job status thing has really just been a Twitter narrative and not reality. That's just my opinion.
It's overblown. It's overblown for sure. Do they know the disdain? Yes, they know the disdain. They have a man that works in that building named Jason Wallers to warn all of them before they go to the microphone what they might get as a question from Matt Schneidman, from Rob Domofsky, from all the great beat writers that we have in Green Bay. They're warning them. They're warning them of the heat on the street. And the heat on the street is always for our special teams coach because our special teams has not performed up to snuff in a pretty good time, but specifically this year in some big time games. But I repeat, Rich Bisaccia didn't miss those kicks. Those are Brandon McManus going through an injury, missing those kicks. If Rich Bisaccia didn't drop an onside kick, that was our best receiver this year in Romeo Doubs, one of our most reliable receivers this year in Romeo Doubs. So he put them in position to make those plays. The players did not make them. And the players know that, and Goody knows that, and Matt knows that. And Ed Policy knows that. And that's why Rich Bisaccia will remain there to be the special teams coordinator. Now, there is a problem. Our special teams, we do need to address that. And that needs to be addressed internally. They are doing that currently. They haven't found the answer in some time. And I hope that they find at least an answer this year that gets them closer to the middle of the pack, to the top half of the pack by the end of the year.
All right, next question from Bradley Upper Crust III. Does this guy actually have his face on here? I think this guy actually might have his face on there.
Sweet.
What needs to happen for the Packers to win their own division and host a playoff game? According to Brass, the GM is doing his job and so is the coach. So where is the disconnect? Why are we complacent with 9 wins and barely reaching the playoffs? I would respectfully disagree with the complacency comment. Complacency would be not trading for Micah Parsons. And they did that. That is the opposite of complacency. I think it's fair to acknowledge that I don't think there's a disconnect. Micah Parsons, Tucker Kraft, Zach Tom, Devontae Wyatt, Elton Jenkins, Christian Watson for a stretch, Jaden Reed for a stretch. Like, some of the Packers' most important players dealt with significant injuries that caused them to miss extended time this season. And part of that is why you haven't seen them go as far, or didn't see them go as far this year, I should say, as their roster would indicate they're capable of doing. So I don't think there's a complacency. I think we need to be careful confusing or associating complacency with maybe a desire for better. I think we can acknowledge that Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst, in my opinion, are the right two guys to lead this franchise, while acknowledging that there are still room for improvements. And I don't mean to keep using this as an excuse, but what needs to happen for the Packers to win their own division and host a playoff game? They were on track to do just that before Micah Parsons tore his ACL. That's what it comes down to.
Packer fans won't want to hear this, but sometimes it takes a little bit of luck. And the luck would have been in the injury category this year. We're beating a dead horse talking about this, but I firmly believe, that the Packers would have won the North if they had not suffered the injury of Micah Parsons there later in the season. I firmly believe that. And that's just one injury. That's not all the rest of them added on top of each other. If they can get a little bit lucky in the injury category next year and this thing trends in a different direction, there's a correction to the norm, then the Packers will be right there fighting for a division championship and hosting some playoff games. And I want to say it like this. That's an important question that he asks about the Packers. What does it take to win a division? Because as you look at teams that go to the Super Bowl, there are some outliers. There are the Packers from 2010. There are the Pittsburgh Steelers from 2005. There are the Giants of, I think, 7 and maybe even 11 as well, to be wild card teams and go to the Super Bowl. They are outliers. The vast majority of teams that go to the Super Bowl are division winners, and not just that, a lot of them are 1 seeds that get a first round bye as well. So it's very imperative that the Packers win this division, because if history shows anything, it's that division winners go to the Super Bowl.
All right, John, this one's for you from Quick Juggernaut at Pack Owner 13. Why did John Kuhn give secrets to Sean Payton on what cleat spike size to wear when they played at Lambeau against Green Bay?
Because I had played at Lambeau for 9 years, and I was a member of the New Orleans Saints at the time. And I can say this proudly. When I went down there to New Orleans and the Packers were on our schedule, I was excited about that game, and I was going to give that team everything that I could to win that football game, which we did. Packers didn't have Aaron Rodgers. Made it a lot easier for us.
Enough said. I don't have an answer for that one. That wasn't directed at me. All right, KCool0742. Who do you expect the Packers to look at in free agency? Let me preface my answer by saying this. According to Over the Cap, let me look at my notes. The Packers currently rank 22nd in cap space at $1.4 million over the cap. They have a handful of their own. Cap? Yeah.
That's the new cap.
I think that's a $303 million, whatever it was. Those are the updated numbers as of this morning.
Which is just astronomical. You realize the cap has nearly doubled since when I was playing in the NFL. It is
that's
wild
crazy
what they have been able to do here with the television deals, and obviously, gambling making its way into being partners with the NFL and such. And kudos to the NFL for being able to drive that cap up, because everybody's happy.
So bottom line, ipso facto, is that the Packers don't really have a ton of cash to spend or cap space. By comparison, the Tennessee Titans have $104.8 million in cap space. The Seattle Seahawks have $73.2 million. The Packers all the way down there at $1.4 million over the cap. So they still need to clear up some space to be cap compliant by the league year. That will happen because it has to. But my point is, they're not necessarily in a spot where they can spend. After Brian Gutekunst traded for Micah Parsons, he mentioned a 3-year window. That 3-year window isn't necessarily, we can go get the top guy each year, but it's 3 years of solid cap health until some big numbers start kicking in, is my understanding of what he was saying. So who can they get? The dream is Tyler Linderbaum, obviously. I think the center from the Ravens. The Athletic has a top 150 free agents coming out soon, I believe. It's not out yet. Otherwise, I would credit that. So I'm looking at ESPN's top 50 unrestricted free agents of 2026. Tyler Linderbaum is third. The Packers are not going to be able to afford him. There's going to be too much competition for him. I think where you have to look, John, and I think you'd agree with me, is at their own guys. The Quay Walkers, the Kingsley and Agbaris, the Sean Ryans. Some of those guys are not going to cost as much money as some of these other guys, the Tyler Linderbaums, the, Trey Hendricksons, if you will. So I think the Packers, if I had to guess, are going to focus on their own guys. And look, some of their own guys are high up on this list, on the top 50. Rasheed Walker's 8th of the top 50 unrestricted free agents. Quay Walker, 13th. Malik Willis, 17th. Romeo Doubs, 21st. I don't think you're going to see this exorbitant free agency from the Packers, and I quite frankly don't blame them.
And here's the deal. There was a third name involved in the extensions, and that was Russ Ball. It'll be his job to create as much cap space as possible and working in conjunction with Brian Gutekunst for what players they can afford and they can afford to go after. I firmly believe there's going to be 2 major targets for Goody this offseason. It's going to be offensive line and it's going to be cornerback. Mm-hmm. And if they start really targeting those positions, not just in free agency, but in the draft, and trying to get a couple players that they feel really good about and attacking it through the quality aspect versus quantity, as many guys as possible, and see who pans out, that'll probably be the best case for them. But going in those directions first, offensive line and then cornerback, or vice versa, and then sprinkling in some interior defensive linemen to help aid with what we saw towards the end of the year. Packers started great in run defense at the beginning of the year. Towards the end of the year, they faltered quite a bit. And a lot of that had to do with the experience that they lost inside when Devontae Wyatt went down. But even when Devontae Wyatt was in there, you started to see some cracks in that run defense throughout the second half of the year. Those are the 3 major spots, and I expect Goody to attack those spots heavily in free agency and in the draft.
Yeah, I think offensive line can probably be filled better or improved better from within the building. I have a story coming out tomorrow on The Athletic ranking the top 10 positions the Packers must address this offseason to play in the Super Bowl next year. And I think number 1's left tackle, but that's going to be addressed from within. Jordan Morgan's probably going to start at left tackle. Number 2 on that list was outside cornerback. Now, big decision. Do you run it back with Keyshawn Nixon and Carrington Valentine? Do you keep Nate Hobbs? If they look outside the building, some of the names on this ESPN top 50, Reek Woolen, number 14, who's playing in the Super Bowl. Jalen Watson from the Chiefs. I believe Greg Newsome is on this list. As I scroll down here. Yeah, Greg Newsome is 34th on the list. Nashawn Wright from the Bears, 37th. So there are some options for intriguing corners if you want to go out and spend on a guy that won't be a most expensive option among all free agents. Obviously, Reek Woolen is probably going to, I'd assume, just re-sign with the Seahawks or get a big deal somewhere else. So I don't know if the Packers could afford that, but especially if Keyshawn Nixon, who is a Pro Bowler, credit to him for that, asks for more money, the Packers will have a decision to make. Do we give it to him or do we look elsewhere for a guy that we think can be a better number one corner? I'll be intrigued to see. All right, last question before we dive into our third segment. Where's Giannis going? From Karsten Lutke. This is a football podcast. I don't know.
He's going nowhere. He's going nowhere.
You think he's going nowhere?
Not before the trade deadline. I don't think so. Some of the packages they're throwing out there don't look good enough for a Giannis Antetokounmpo to go for. When you talk about a superstar, a top 5 talent in the NBA, yes, I know he's had some injury history, and that's what teams are trying to protect against. But teams are looking for a steal right now with Giannis, and I don't think the Bucks are going to give it to him.
And we have one more from Bradley Uppercrust III. Appreciate you throwing in multiple questions. Will Goody ever do a season-ending presser after ignoring the CB room, signing Banks and Hobbs to horrendous deals, and it resulting in one of the worst losses in Packers history? Goody might be talking this week, I think, but at this point, I'm not sure if there's much of a purpose of that, given he'll be talking at the Combine in 3 weeks from today. Literally 3 weeks from today, as we record this on Monday, February 2nd, around noon. He will be talking 3 weeks from today. So at this point, that season-ending presser kind of happens within a week after the season ends, and it would kind of feel weird to do it a couple weeks after the Packers season ends. And then it would pretty much defeat the purpose of us going to the Combine to talk to Goody, since there wouldn't be nearly as much to talk to him about. But yeah, ignoring the CB room, signing Banks and Hobbs to horrendous deals, and it resulting in one of the worst losses in Packers history. I don't know if those things directly resulted in that, but and I don't know if I go as aggressive as your phrasing on those two things. But in our defense, we did, or I did, note the potential cornerback room deficiencies and those signings of Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs as notches on the cons list for Brian Gutekunst. So there are some people not happy with him right now, to say the least.
And that's fine. And that's fine because an ornery fan base, it drives a little bit of motivation here behind what's going to happen in the offseason. A lot of changes still to come with the staff, with the roster. We know the roster will be massively different next year, but the cornerstones of this football team are there, and they're there because of Brian Gutekunst.
All right. Third segment, we got a couple coaching change news items to discuss, both inside Green Bay and outside Green Bay, with some ties to Green Bay. Then also, what do we think is going to happen in the Super Bowl? I know this is a Packers show, but the big game is happening on Sunday between the Seahawks and Patriots. We'll preview that a little bit too. Stick with us. You're listening to The Tundra. Welcome back to The Tundra, episode 23. This segment is brought to you by Potawatomi Sportsbook. Head to Potawatomi Casino Hotel for the big game on February 8th. Watch at the bar, attend a tailgate party, or reserve premium seating.
Yep, the big game going down February 8th. Where are you watching it? And you can get an unrivaled experience only at Potawatomi Casino Hotel Milwaukee. Watch that big game at 1100 Bar and Lounge, Rock and Brews, or Small Bar. Reserve premium seating inside Potawatomi Sportsbook. Ticket and reservations are still available. Plenty of food and drink specials too, including $10 off that 100-ounce beer tube that we know and love, Matt Schneidman.
Yes, sir. All right. A lot going on in the coaching world, both inside Green Bay and outside Green Bay. So we're going to go through all of it, take you through some moves that have to do with the Packers, some that have Packers ties. I wrote them all down.
It's a long list.
Packers need a quarterbacks coach, John. We'll start there. Sean Mannion to call plays for the Philadelphia Eagles. What do you think of that one?
Well, I think if you talk about the experience Sean Mannion has, 2 years in the NFL under Matt LaFleur, you find out that how Mannion got hired. Matt LaFleur was called by Mannion to go in and do an interview for another team. And throughout the process, Matt was like, holy cow, this guy is going to interview spectacularly. I need to keep him on my staff, and ended up keeping him in Green Bay. He's a guy that's highly touted and very much revered around the NFL and in the circles because of his playing days, being the backup quarterback that he was. And those 9 years of playing experience as a backup serves him well in being able to be one of those new great minds in the NFL. The Eagles are looking for somebody. And guess what? They have Sirianni as well. So if Mannion struggles to call plays at the beginning of the season, they always have Sirianni there as a backup.
So I believe it was Tom Pelissero who reported that the Packers are interviewing or have interviewed Connor Senger for their quarterback's coach job. He's 30 years old. He was the Arizona Cardinals pass game specialist. He is from Wisconsin, went to high school in Milwaukee. He's from West Allis, specifically. And he played college football at multiple colleges in Wisconsin, including the University of Wisconsin. So that would be a neat hire to replace Sean Mannion, if that is indeed the way the Packers go. Jeff Hafley is ransacking the Packers coaching staff.
It's called pillaging. He's pillaging.
Sean Duggan, the Packers linebackers coach, is reportedly, and these are all according to reports, so I'm not claiming to have this news myself. Sean Duggan is Jeff Hafley's defensive coordinator in Miami. Ryan Downard, Duggan was the Packers linebackers coach, as we know, who was with Hafley at Boston College. Ryan Downard, who was the Packers DB's coach, is now Miami's defensive passing game coordinator. And Nathaniel Hackett, obviously former Packers offensive coordinator, and this year was a consultant for the Packers, is Miami's quarterbacks coach. So Hafley taking a couple guys with him. And John Kuhn, you know who the Dolphins are keeping, according to Ian Rappaport, as their linebackers coach under Jeff Hafley? Joe Barry. So Joe Barry and Jeff Hafley on the same staff in Miami. How about that?
Teaming up together. We knew this would be a little bit of a Green Bay South situation when Jeff Hafley went down there. I believe he took Wendell Davis with him as well. Did he not?
Ball King. Yes, he did.
Okay. So several Packers coaches on the defensive side will need to be addressed and filled. And some of those names have been coming in as we speak.
Derek Ansley out the door. He's on the Cowboys defensive staff. That was expected after Jonathan Gannon, the Packers' new defensive coordinator, who they officially announced today, hired Bobby Babich, the Buffalo Bills defensive coordinator, as Green Bay's new defensive passing game coordinator. I believe it was reported that Bobby Babich interviewed for the Packers' DC job last time around before Matt LaFleur hired Hafley. Sam Seifkis, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is going to be the Packers' new linebackers coach. He was the former Virginia Tech defensive coordinator. And then it was reported today, I believe by CBS Sports, who also reported the linebackers coach, that Daniel Bullocks, the former 49ers safeties coach, will be the Packers defensive backs coach, replacing Ryan Downard. So that still leaves DeMarcus Covington as the defensive line coach. So that would seem to be, as it currently stands, because no reports are out there about if Jonathan Gannon's bringing in his own guy or if Covington is looking for opportunities elsewhere. He obviously, I believe, reportedly interviewed for the Cowboys DC job and the Jets DC job. But all those names are kind of the ins and outs of the Packers defensive and offensive staff changes that have been happening these past couple weeks.
And, you know, the staff sometimes takes a little bit of time to figure out. And what I do like is the majority of the offensive staff is going to stay, right? You're not going to have a big change over there. So there's some familiarity going forward. But this NFL was rocked by the 10 head coaching jobs and spots that were open, and then another handful of defensive and offensive coordinators around the league that got switched out, that weren't involved in those head coaching changes. So there was a lot of musical chairs around the NFL this year, a lot of teams learning new systems and new foundations. And the Green Bay Packers at least are going to have the majority of theirs still in place, albeit a lot of changes on the defensive side.
A couple notable tidbits in coach and GM news that kind of relate to the Packers, but not directly. Matt LaFleur is now not the only LaFleur brother who's a head coach in the NFL. Mike LaFleur is now the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. Unfortunately for the storyline, the Cardinals do not play the Packers next season, or next regular season at least, I should say. But neat that the brothers Harbaugh are now not the only set of brothers to be head coaches in the NFL.
And that tree that originated way back with the elder Shanahan and followed through with the younger Shanahan and Sean McVay just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger in the NFL. The number of names that have started together and climbed the rankings, they are taking over the NFL in the head coaching roles.
And the Vikings fired their GM, which was surprising a couple weeks after the season, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. They are not going to hire a new GM per se until after the draft. I think Rob Brzezinski, who's one of their personnel executives, is going to run the Vikings through the draft. So an interesting change in the NFC North. But John, The big thing happening in the NFL this week is obviously the Super Bowl. The New England Patriots, the number 2 seed in the AFC, and the Seattle Seahawks, the number 1 seed in the NFC. Packers last saw the Seahawks in joint practice in training camp when they came to Lambeau. They didn't play the Patriots this year. They will next year. What are your first thoughts on the big game, which you should obviously go to Potawatomi Hotel and Casino to watch? I think I know where I'm leaning on this. If you want to just give your feel on the game, what you think, and then maybe a score prediction.
Yeah, I like Seattle in this. I thought Seattle was very impressive when we saw them for joint practices in that preseason game. And I got the chance to talk to John Schneider when they were here in Green Bay, and he talked about why they sought after Sam Darnold, which, by the way, he's the reason Adolfo-Mensah is gone in Minnesota. He's the clear. It's a little confusing on the timing that it took several weeks after the season. Oh no, it's not. They were watching Sam Darnold in the playoffs, and if you got to the Super Bowl, boo, you're gone. You picked the wrong quarterback here, dude. Yes, I believe that very, very firmly. But as I've watched the Seattle Seahawks this year, their defense was phenomenal. Their defense was phenomenal in August, and they continued throughout the course of the season. They're very healthy, aside from Zach Charbonnet suffering his season-ending injury a few weeks ago. And they have a knockout wide receiver in JSN, a quarterback playing at a good level. Their identity is to run the football and throw play action from under center. And the New England Patriots have been a great story. I just think Seattle is playing with a little bit of that magic that Super Bowl teams have.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fantastic, fantastic game. I think it's going to be closer than some people think. I think the spread is at +4.5, if I'm not mistaken. I need to check the latest Potawatomi lines, which I'm going to do right now, just in case that line has changed. But I think Drake May, we saw that he can get a little flustered against a defense like the Texans. And obviously the conditions played a big part in how he played against the Broncos in Denver during the AFC title game. But I think that Seahawks defense can really cause him some trouble. I think the Patriots keep it tight, but I think the Seahawks win. I'm going to go 27-23.
Yeah, I like that score. Anywhere kind of 27, 23, 30, 24, something to that nature. I think it's a one-score game. Mm-hmm. But I think the big key here is Drake May. Can he run with the football? Can he get a couple big plays with his legs, keep drives going, convert into first downs? He's a little bit nicked up. Sam Darnold's still a little bit nicked up. So the quarterback position, big question mark going into this game, or at least some red flags around it. But both defenses are very capable of winning a Super Bowl here. I just think Seattle's is a little bit better.
Yeah, Potawatomi line is -4.5 to the Seahawks. So I'm going to pick the Patriots to cover, but the Seahawks to still win. And that probably means Sam Darnold wins MVP, which what a story that would be, John Kuhn. All right, perhaps next year we'll be doing this podcast live from LA, where the Packers are playing in the Super Bowl. Who knows if they can stay healthy. We appreciate everybody for listening. As always, give us a follow on Instagram and X at the Tundra GB. Subscribe to our YouTube at the Tundra GB. And we'll talk to you next week. Appreciate everybody for listening.